Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President, Dale Carnegie Training, Tokyo, Japan. My special guest today is Will Shaffer, the President of Boeing, Japan. Will, welcome.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you very much. Now, Will, you've been in Japan quite a few years. You mentioned to me before, and with Boeing for quite a few years too. But can you just give us a little bit of background on how is it that you are here running one of the most famous companies in the world in the Japan operation?
Yeah, so I would start by maybe saying that I feel like I got very lucky.
Oh, very good.
As an opportunity to one, come to Japan, and two, to represent Boeing here in Japan. So. It wasn't something that was really on my career track of something I was aspiring to, but somebody asked me to potentially take this opportunity, and I'm really very excited to be here to represent Boeing in Japan.
So where are the roots for you? You're coming from America, I guess. Is it engineering? Is it, what's the background that got you into this industry and then into Boeing, and then how's it been in Japan? We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay. Well, I'd actually say my start with Japan actually came very early in my career. I was a Navy pilot. I used to fly P-3s for the U.S. Navy, stationed out of Whidbey Island.
So is P-3, I don't know, is that a fighter? Is that a bomber? Is that
it's something in between. P is, you got it on the last one.
Right.
P stands for patrol, which basically is generally designed around anti-submarine warfare as well as reconnaissance.
Right.
We actually have shifted from the P-3. The U.S. Navy shifted from the P-3 and is actually purchasing a Boeing product now, the P-8, which is based on the 737. But the Japanese military actually still flies P-3s. They actually built under license here in country by Kawasaki. It's a fairly large aircraft. It's actually about close to the same size as one of the smaller 737s, but it's a 4-engine turboprop. Primary mission is to be out there over the water, either looking or searching for targets of interest or search and rescue missions. As well as doing anti-submarine warfare, particularly in times of conflict. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So from reconnaissance flight pilot to what do you do after you've been flying aircraft? What do you do after that?
There's a lot of stops along the way. I spent a little bit of time in business school when I left the Navy, and then ended up working in consulting for a few years in the Seattle area, which is where I actually got my first introduction to Boeing. I actually did a few projects working for Boeing at that period of time. Moved on to work for another U.S. company. It's now known as, I think, Raytheon, after the variety of mergers and acquisitions that they've gone through. But at that time, it was United Technologies. One of the main pieces of work that I did there was actually working for Sikorsky, which is a helicopter manufacturing company in the United States, and used to run a factory there for Sikorsky. When I left there, I actually wanted to get back to the Northwest. Found an opportunity to come join Boeing in its supply chain, and spent many years in the Puget Sound area working for Boeing across multiple roles within the supply chain organization before I got the opportunity to come here.
So if we think about your background in terms of where the theme is leadership, obviously leading in Japan. So obviously you get military-style leadership training when you're in the military. Then you get into consulting, which is a different type of work. It's probably more individuals having an ability to consult with clients, And then you're getting into running a factory, which again, you've got people of all different types and, requirements of job type working and reporting to you. And then you join Boeing, and then you're working in that sort of corporate Boeing way of doing things, I suppose, the Boeing way. And that's got a certain corporate style of leadership to it. And then you get to Japan. So this is where it gets interesting. The point of this podcast is to help people who, like you, offered a job to come to Japan and say, hey, we'll go to Japan, run our operation there, and you go, great, Japan, okay. I don't know anything about that, particularly in terms of leading a team here necessarily, but to have people like you give that experience, particularly those early experiences of what you noticed was different or challenging, or that, you thought, oh, okay, that's a bit different, adjust to that, or that's not what I expected. What were some of your early comparative leadership experiences on the Japanese side compared to when you were stateside?
Yeah, so I think I touched on briefly, I've had a fair amount of exposure to the Japanese culture, both when I was in the military. I had actually deployed to Japan several times. And then as leading the several categories in the supply chain, I actually worked with and came to Japan many times, working with some of Boeing's Japanese suppliers. So I wasn't completely new to Japan and the culture that was here. But I also think one of the advantages of working for a multinational like Boeing is it to a certain extent coming in and leading a team here that is within Boeing Japan. Actually, although it is still Japan and it has a fair amount of Japanese local hires on the team, it does have a very international flavor, and to a certain extent we have local hires who are from all over the world. I think you just met one of my teammates who's from the UK.
Yep.
But we have international hires around the world here on our Japan team. So it does actually lead to more of kind of a cohesive environment. But still, I think one of the challenges is interacting with many of the local stakeholders, whether it's our customers, both in the government or in the commercial aircraft, or some of our suppliers. We have a lot of things that we have to interact with, and there is a bit of a change. I think that one of probably the biggest things that I'd suggest is patience. I think.
When did you discover that?
I think I've known that for a while, but even more so now, just kind of seeing some of how often it does take time for things to change. But oftentimes, when Japan does make the change, they get it right. A classic example that you could point to is potentially even the COVID-19 vaccinations. It took them a while before they really got started, but when they started, or once they did it very well. It was very efficient, from May to the end of the summer, they got 80% of the population vaccinated. So that's a classic example of Japan maybe taking some time, thinking about what the change looks like, but oftentimes they get it right. So understanding that part of the culture is probably very important.
I guess that's interesting because my experience working with international organizations is that they work on a timetable that's 365, 24 hours a day, and things are moving very, very fast in parts of the organization. And then the Japan component has to fit into that. And so their degree of patience with Japan is usually pretty thin. And we tend to be the person like in the middle here between the Japanese operation and the headquarters, or the global operation, trying to, speed the Japanese side up a bit and calm the, headquarters side down a bit. So how have you found that? How have you found some of the challenges of playing that role in terms of this idea of speed and patience required?
Yeah. No, I think, what you speak to, Greg, is accurate in the sense that a lot of the world tends to move faster than Japan, and it expects a quicker response or a quicker movement from Japan. I would say that I am lucky because Boeing has had a long history in Japan. Many of its leaders have a lot of experience working with Japanese companies. Our current president of Boeing Commercial, Stan Deal, used to be the sales leader for Japan, so he has a full understanding of how Japan works, as do many of the leaders within the Boeing Commercial organization. Our BDS organization, we've been selling aircraft and working with Japan on the defense side for many years. So I think there is already a baseline understanding within Boeing of the Japanese culture, how Japan works, and the way that things get done in Japan. There's still a frustration. I mean, obviously, there's a push for things to happen faster, and we certainly have to be a bit of the temper between messages that come from the U.S. Versus what actually gets delivered to our Japanese stakeholders here. And I think probably the other piece to that, Greg, is really making sure that we help educate some of our leaders that there is a process, there is a way of how things are getting done, And, where we see progress, at least being able to describe it to them as that, hey, we've made progress here, even if it doesn't feel like progress is actually happening. And here's what that progress looks like. So there's a chunk of that we've been able to, that we're required to kind of bridge that gap.
So apart from, patience, Will, what other things sort of occurred to you that was maybe a different requirement of being successful as a leader in Japan?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I would say that Japan emphasizes probably more than I've seen in a lot of other countries is the face-to-face contact. Actually, something that's been very hard, in the environment that we've been in for the last 2 years and most of my time in Japan. In some ways, that's actually led to many of the business units looking for more of a role from either myself or my team to actually carry on conversations with our stakeholders here and be the face of Boeing to go have those face-to-face meetings. I know that Japan is migrating, as is the rest of the world, to understanding how virtual fits in. But in many high-stakes conversations, there's a lot of need for that face-to-face, and that's probably a big chunk of things that I've seen here in Japan and how things have to work.
So we talked about patience, we talked about that face-to-face dimension. Anything else that occurred to you was like, okay, this is something I need to adjust in myself. I've had a military upbringing in terms of how leadership works. I've had commercial experience in the States on how leadership works, and I've been in Boeing, and now I'm in Boeing Japan. But as you say, you've got clients, you've got stakeholders, you've got governments, you've got a whole range of people that Boeing needs to interact with. So any other things you found you had to make an adjustment within yourself to be effective here as a leader?
Yeah, one of the things, and just by nature, I'm an introvert, Greg, so I kind of have already seen in myself the fact of some of the challenges in communicating in large meetings and things like that within my own organization in the past. It is one of the things that I've had to actually take notice of here is how do I draw that out of many of my employees? Because I find that a lot of, particularly our Asian employees tend to be a little bit more shy in being willing to share their ideas, and it needs to be drawn out just a touch in that part of the process. In that sense, the flip side, I will emphasize, one of the advantages of working for a company like Boeing here in Japan is that we do have a very broad set of employees here that help set a culture that's probably a little bit more outspoken than maybe a usual Japanese company. So I think that's a good thing that we've
I guess they're sort of self-selecting in a way, aren't they? They come to Boeing because they want to work in an international organization, a big organization, prestigious organization, and the culture is you can't sit at the meeting and say nothing and think a lot. You've actually got to speak up and contribute and have some value and add that to the meeting. And I guess that's also most Western meetings, the decisions are taken at the meeting. And most Japanese organizations, decisions are taken before the meeting. And then the meeting sort of,
the
puts a nice bow on the top, and then we've all decided and we're good. So it's a little bit, the perspective is a little bit different, isn't it, in terms of what's going to happen in the room?
There's some of that I've had to learn along the way. Obviously a lot of the work that happens prior to the meeting, with the Japanese to set the stage so that the meeting just is already a formality. I think we've learned some of that. Probably less of that. More of that is required with our stakeholders external to Boeing. Less of that probably in our internal operations and how we operate here.
Yeah, that makes it interesting too. And in terms of things like getting engagement, because this has become quite a topic in the last few years. And in fact, I thought, it was there's a big sort of wave of engagement interest, and then it sort of calmed down and other things became interesting. But just this week, on our weekly newsletter, we put out, a whole bunch of hints on how to get more engagement in a white paper we have. And boom, suddenly we got this big take-up of people downloading the white paper. Oh, that's interesting. So engagement's still there as a topic. So how do you find, or what have you found in your travels through the different stages of your career that works well in getting team members engaged? And what have you found works well here in Japan to get team members engaged?
Yeah. I think I've used a variety of techniques to engage my teams and garner ideas outside of that, whether it's small group meetings, individual, bring all the way down to one-on-ones and skip level meetings, talking to folks around the place, management by walking around. I oftentimes like to go visit a lot of, our employees are dispersed throughout Japan. We have a small group here in Tokyo. And particularly when there was no COVID, I made a real effort to try and get around and start meeting with employees and seeing our employees. I think Japan, there is a bit of how you pull that out of the individual. I think one of the things, maybe a little bit of this virtual environment helps a little bit. I find that oftentimes we get questions that may not have gotten asked. It'll come in through chat on WebEx or things like that, where before the individual may not have submitted a question or been willing to speak up in a live meeting. So I'm finding some of those things are actually being more effective, although I still worry about many of the silent folks that don't speak up or don't express their opinions or bring things in. With that though, one of the key things that I usually do in a meeting is try and pull opinions from my staff.
Right.
If we're sitting in or people within the meeting and try and at least pull their ideas in, even if they're sitting, and have been quiet and not actively involved in the discussion, at least try and capture those ideas and pull them into the session. So, yeah.
And, one of the things we've found too is that if you ask someone straight off the bat a question, they tend to go into panic mode because they're starting to think, okay, who's more senior in the room? Should I venture forth with my opinion? What if people laugh at me? What if people think it's a stupid idea? What if it's a wrong idea? So better to say nothing. So one of the things we found works quite well is to get people to write down. What are your thoughts on? Just make a note. Yeah. What are your thoughts on X, So they had time to think about it and they've made some notes rather than, hey, what do you think about X? It's like, ooh, I don't want to say anything. So that little bit of timing gap between the question and the answer we found works quite well. And I think your chat gives that capacity too, where they've got a bit of time to think about it without any particular pressure, and then they can write something or they can contribute something. We found that works quite well in meetings as well. And so other things that you've found works well in engagement. I mean, I take it at the moment we're remote for most of us working remotely, and that lends a different sort of challenge, doesn't it, to having that connection with people, keeping them connected. Yeah.
I mean, we do a lot around recognition across the company. Recognition for jobs where people have excelled above and beyond or done a particularly good job. I think one of the challenges always, and one of the shifts that we're trying to make as a company overall, and it's something that I've seen, in Japan as well as outside of Japan, is we oftentimes recognize our firefighters, and really the people that we really want to try and highlight or discover are the ones that you never had to fight a fire because they've been so proactive that they've been able to keep ahead of the process and not have to fight that fire that came down the pike. But I think, highlighting or utilizing some of our engagement programs or recognition is another way of, making sure that employees feel like they're valued within the company. I find that, even outside of the formal recognition or formal programs, oftentimes, even just sitting down to either say thank you to an employee or being very aware of the job that they did and thanking them and knowing the impact that it is, much more than just walking by and saying great job and patting them on the back, but actually knowing the impact and knowing what that does, that actually has really been able to move spirits in a lot of ways. Because a lot of people, it's great to see, I got a few extra dollars for something or things like that, but a lot of people really enjoy, I myself really enjoy just somebody acknowledging the work that I did. Right?
Yeah, and you raise a good point too. I mean, we teach leadership, obviously, and one of the things we talk about there is, hey, great job is a very confusing statement because people have multifaceted jobs. And when you say great job, which of these many facets of my job was great? And it's a bit vague, it doesn't really hit the mark. But if you say, hey, great job on, or I really appreciate that you did, and the fact that that got done by, that really tells them, oh, Will really understands my contribution. He recognises it. I feel appreciated.
And I'd push you one more step, Greg, but being able to actually say what that did.
What they did, the application.
Beyond just saying, hey, you got this done by this, but what was the effect? That really just shows that you've actually recognized how they've moved the needle for the company, how they've made some sort of change, and it's had real impact.
One funny thing too I found in Japan, when I first got here, I had that very westernized thinking about leadership, and if someone did something, top sales or whatever it might be, get them up the front and yay, congratulations, like we do in Australia, right? But what I found was people were very uncomfortable. And I quickly realized that, okay, there's a certain proportion of people who don't mind being hauled up the front and, hey, look at me, I did a great job. Yeah. A lot of people don't like that because they worry about their colleagues going to be stabbing them in the back or griping about them, and the sort of quiet lunch or the quiet coffee, or just, as you say, sit down and say something individual without the fanfare. For some people, it works better. So how have you found that yourself? Because in Australia, you wouldn't have a problem. No one's going to be shy about being recognised down there. Hey, great, pick me, But Japan, I found that a bit different. How's your experience been?
Well, I don't think it's different than really any organization. I think maybe there's a few more people that lie on the shy side than on the I want to be out in front and recognized and paraded around in front of my colleagues. But I wouldn't say that doesn't exist in almost any organization that I've been in. I've seen it when I was running a general manager of a factory. I've seen it when I've been running my supply chain organization. There are those that really shy away from and actually feel a little bit threatened by being pulled up in front of their colleagues, where there are those that actually want that. And maybe there's more that are biased the other direction, but part of it is reading people, and maybe sometimes you're not always going to get it right.
That's true.
But trying to read people and figure out where they fit into that realm, and oftentimes, in some cases, I'll ask managers, what is the best situation to recognize these folks? I really want to say something good about them. Is it good to call them out in an all hands, or do you want me to do it in a smaller group meeting? I've used that tool in talking to the managers to not only think about the recognition for the team, but how the team wants to be recognized.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. That's good. One thing too, the key to creativity, innovation, is engagement, because if you're not engaged, you don't care. So first step, you've got to be engaged. So when you've got people who are engaged, how do you help them to be creative and innovative? I don't necessarily mean they're restricted to R&D, scientific type of people. I'm talking about everyone can innovate in any part of the company, any part of the work, any part of their job. How do you create that culture that's appreciated and encouraged, and get people actually pony up ideas?
So, I think probably your question is actually very important for how we think about how we survive as a company, Boeing, overall. You think about our company, not just here in Japan, but everywhere. We are a highly regulated industry, both our commercial side and our defense side. it is very easy to get very process focused and not think about innovation and how do we break through and how do we do things. And over all of this, there is a safety culture that we have to layer on, safety and quality culture that is very high. And to a certain extent, that's part of where we are trying to do a lot of our innovation right now. Is how do we instill the safety culture, the SMS, the safety management system across our organization while still driving innovation. So I think that one is when I think about how we try and encourage people to innovate, one is when people come to you with an innovation, it's very easy to close your ears and shut down and say, okay, well, that's interesting, but walk off and not do anything. I think, engaging when somebody comes to you with a new idea and actually exploring where it could go and how you could develop it and where it could develop, that's probably step one is just being there to, being able to listen and actually engage, and maybe even, find areas where there's strength in it, and also finding areas where it needs improvement. I think encouraging or rewarding managers who drive or encourage their teams to innovate, while still, as I emphasize, still following the important parts of the process and meeting the requirements that we have around safety, but encouraging that innovation is critical. Obviously, we have a lot of innovation on the product and the engineering side, but it really comes down to the process side. And it's interesting. One of the jobs that I had within Boeing is where we worked in both sourcing as well as sourcing for our suppliers much of the raw material and other things that they have. And it's interesting because people would look at it and say that's probably a very boring part of the aerospace industry. But in a lot of cases, that is where a lot of the innovation occurs, not just in materials and products and whether it's in fasteners that are new and capable of providing new techniques or labor savings, but also in innovative materials, but not just in the materials, but also in how we think about sourcing and providing those and working with different suppliers. I found that I had some great teams that were very innovative in how they bring in new suppliers and how they structure everything, how they work with many of our tier one suppliers to help create opportunities around this raw material and fasteners and things like that. It was amazing working with an innovative team like that, and I'd say I'd carry that through a lot of the things that I've done. It just was a great opportunity. So, yeah.
And what about? And one of the things that interests me, we did a lot of training for a big Japanese plastics company, very big company, and working with a lot of their senior leaders. And I imagined that they had like their own sort of company ideation or idea generation brainstorming methodology, because of heavy R&D component of that business. And I was doing this training, I asked them, because we have our own, in leadership, we teach people how to do brainstorming and how to get ideas. There's a process. Yeah. And I thought, well, our process will be nothing compared to these guys. They're bound to have something much more sophisticated. So I asked them, I said, what do you guys use? And we don't really have anything. I thought, wow, that's a bit surprising. So I said, well, here's what we do. So, oh, that's great. We'll use that. So I was a bit taken aback by that, to be honest. But you've also got a very big R&D functionality in the company. Have you found that there are methodologies for getting out ideas and ideation that you sort of can take out of that part of the Boeing world and you bring that into back office or supply chain or anything inside the company that's not necessarily in the lab and take that and get those creative ideas? And what have you found has been working well here in Japan?
Yeah. So I'll kind of step away from the Japan question because you asked me maybe a bigger question first, and I'll try and answer that and then maybe come back to Japan, which may be a little different. My role before this was working on one of the next products for Boeing Commercial. So I got a chance to work with the product development team. I was part of that product development team. And I'd say, we have, a lot of ways of getting what are the features, what do customers want, and turning those into what would we have to design or create as a product to go support what they need. And it goes all the way from interviewing our customers to understanding markets to analyzing where the growth is happening in the world, because sometimes maybe our customers might ask for this, but where we think things are going to happen is over here with this type of market or this region. So being able to fold that into our product development process and turn that into how do you crank it out? How do you what do you have to do around design? What do you have to do around structures or materials or things like that? One of the great opportunities that I had was actually with that program. Our structure process of designing the aircraft was relatively straightforward. I would say that there were two ways that program was really focused on innovating. The first was really in designing how we build that aircraft, because so much of what we've done in the past is we find the product, we say this is how it's all going to come together, we design the parts for it, and then we start putting together the production system for it. And yeah, you had the production system in mind, but you find all sorts of issues and problems and things like that. And in this, we were putting the production system right at the front end of how are we going to build this, and almost making, I shouldn't say almost, we were making product choices or decisions around the design of the aircraft that would be necessary for the production system. The other big innovation that we were introducing was how we design. I think we looked at some of the software tools that are out, or software design systems that were out there, as well as other things, and we looked at different ways of how to design and how to encourage design with small teams and getting the process and the product done along the way. I think unfortunately Boeing didn't move forward with that product, and that's kind of where I am. Where I transitioned out was right before they canceled the program, or canceled launch of that program. But it is, a core thing of how we think about idea generation. How do we bring in new ways of doing things? How do we get a team to work together differently? How do we change the thought process? Because we've always been thinking about how do we get that best performing product, but the ideal is to think about not just the product, but how we're going to make it. I think bringing that into Japan, one of the key things, and my office manager, we haven't done it yet because we haven't been scheduled in the budget cycle, and particularly with COVID and everybody moving virtual. But I was working in an open office environment. We're very much divided into offices right now, and one of the things I want to break down those walls, bring people together, and be in a much more open office environment.
So you had open plan before, and thanks to COVID, all the walls have come back.
I was open plan in the U.S.
Okay,
I came over to Japan. The first thing I wanted to do is knock down the walls.
Right.
Now, all that being said, I think COVID has certainly put a stall on that, but we have to get segmented out, and we'll probably think about that in the future. How we open up the office environment and create more interaction, more innovation. I'm a little bit worried because culturally, Japan, at least my Japanese staff, is very much about, I need my office, I need my space, my protective area. But I think we'll find that when we do this, it will probably create more interactions, and we'll still have areas. I think we're still in, and probably will be for a while, in a hybrid work environment where people are mixed on when they come into the office. And a lot of people, when they come into the office, they want to see other people. So we have to get inertia in that and drive that. And I think getting into an open office environment where you have that room for interaction with privacy rooms, I think it will actually probably help drive or change and change the culture a little bit here.
I was thinking probably in terms of, say you've got a team of any size, could be small team, big team, they're in a room or they're out in the open space, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And you've got to think about an idea. We've got something we want to improve in the organisation, so let's get some ideas together on that. Do you have what I was aiming for before, is there like a Boeing system for getting those ideas out? Like, okay, step one, we all do this. Step 2, 3, 4, 5. Is it laid out like that, or it's not laid out like that?
I would say it all depends on the type of issue. I mean, we tend to call it. I mean, we have plenty of ways around innovating around a product. When we start working towards changing or working a process, we do have a Boeing Boeing problem-solving methodology that we use
Right.
that kind of walks us through. It's got multiple steps that walks us through, and actually we've used it on a couple of different situations. I mean, it basically brings us back to our lean tools and how we do that. You get into almost a value stream map of the process, and you understand what's not working and try and address those types of things. And it has methodologies even for new things. Like right now, we're working as we're establishing ourselves as part of our work to be a direct supplier around aftermarket for the Ministry of Defense. Well, in that, we now have to think about all the things that are going to be required, whether it's audit, whether it's quality system, what are our HR requirements that we're going to need as a company. And so that's kind of where we're innovating and helping work to think and create, and we've had to do a lot of that work. A lot of it's been structured probably through this Boeing product problem-solving method that we've been utilizing. Just it provides enough structure to be able to get the ideas down, understand what the issues are, and start putting together the projects to go work and close the gaps.
That's good, because a lot of the companies we work with have no methodology. And the methodology is often the boss is standing next to the whiteboard with a pen, give me those ideas, and then they crucify the ideas as they come up and basically stops the idea flow. But it's good that you've got a methodology. And, part of that engagement and creativity part, there's a big element of trust in there, and so, and I guess, particularly you've been in a military environment too, which is totally about trust, because everyone's life is on the line, potentially. And then you get into industry where there's a lot of trust too within teams. And you're talking about getting people to be engaged and to come up with ideas. There's a trusting element there. What have you found has worked well in Japan to garner people's trust?
It's hard to answer this one, Greg, because I feel like I think about it less about Japan, but just in general. And I think the same rules apply. One is create safe environments where people feel like they can share what they're thinking or what they want to express. And that always doesn't bring out all the ideas, but it certainly creates an environment for people to talk or to express their ideas and get those out. I think the other thing is obviously I'm very much a person who once we get things kind of generated, or if somebody has an issue, I want them to run that issue. So giving them the responsibility and the ownership to go run it, but still being there to support them and making sure that understanding how much supervision is required. And I'd have to say this was something I learned early in my career when I had a few things go off track, where I let somebody or put authority in somebody's hands and let them run it, probably where they hit roadblocks and didn't really report up and let us know and found things to be off track. That you have to do some verification. You got to trust them, you got to give them the authority, you got to give them the ownership. But you need to do some verification along the way to make sure that it's still moving forward.
It's tricky, isn't it? Between
and that's a very hard balance, because you can get into so much verification that you're running it and not trusting them to run it, right?
Something micromanaging it. When you want to actually empower them. So where's that line? Is hard, isn't it?
I do think that most of the people that I've worked with will say I'm far from a micromanager, but I have gotten better about at least spending focused time with teams and trying to make sure that or understanding what the progress is and where things are going, but still giving them the authority to go execute and get the job done that they need to do. So I think those are probably a couple of things that I'd say. And I think the last piece is at the end of all of this is, even though you might delegate the authority, always take the responsibility. If things go wrong, and things do go wrong, it's yours, it's not theirs. I think a lot of people who work for me really enjoy the aspect that I usually don't leave them out hanging with, when the boss comes in and says, this is all wrong, whose fault is this? I'll raise my hand and say it's mine because it was my responsibility. Yes, there's missteps by the team, but it was my responsibility. So kind of always being able to be there to kind of support the team in that respect is critical.
And I guess too, often in delegation, people who are being delegated to are thinking, hang on a minute, I'm already busy. Why am I doing your work? You're getting paid a lot more than I am. Don't need this. So often the delegation becomes dumping, hey, do this and get it done by X, and not the supervision, the clarification that you mentioned before. How have you found a good way of selling the delegation to people in showing them it's in their best interest to actually take on this piece of work as opposed to they feel, oh, I'm being impinged upon here?
Yeah, I mean, I've run into that a little bit in my career, Greg, but probably not that much. I mean, to be very honest, probably very early on in my career, I mean, I came out of consulting and worked in the business world, and I'd probably say I didn't delegate enough early on. I think it's really when I went to run a large, site for Sikorsky where I realized very quickly that I can't do everything. And I always was thinking about my value add and how I make value and how I add value to this situation. It really became about developing leaders, and building a team that is that one trusts you to work with them and help them do, but also feels the authority and the responsibility that they're going to have to get this done. Because I think getting that to them. Getting it to that level where they actually know that they're going to be held accountable, maybe not by my boss, but certainly by me, that they've got to deliver on this. I think, I think there's a lot of cases where, there may be cases where people are remiss to maybe be pulled into a project and feel like, oh, I've got all this other stuff. But I think oftentimes it's really about engagement and talking to them about the criticality of the project. And if you truly feel that the person's not engaged and they're not going to get the work done and they're not going to do it, you need to talk about their priorities and how it fits in. And maybe they're the wrong person for the team. And you move away from them and you go back to if it's a function you're not responsible, go back to the functional leader and say, this person's got too much on their plate. We need somebody different. And then that gets everything kind of reorganized or rebalanced or reworked.
I find in Japan that the fear of making a mistake drives a lot of behaviour. And one of the things it drives is they're very, very focused, I found, my Japanese team members over the years, on job responsibility. They want it very clearly defined and they don't like it to be changed. So my job is this because now I will take accountability for this, but I don't want to take any other accountability in case there's a failure and it's going to come back on me. So how have you found to encourage people to maybe think beyond their very narrow range of their job responsibilities to take on a delegation where there is some risk? And how do you deal with mistakes? How do you deal with failure? Because the two things go together,
Yeah, I'd say that probably, I'm following a good set of leaders who have been out here as President of Boeing Japan, and I'd also say that we've got a very good leadership team out here. There's areas. There are certainly areas where I think there's that fear of making a mistake, but I think we've tried to drive it into a culture where we know that mistakes will happen. But I fully understand kind of what you're driving at, which is there is underlying in all of kind of it's interesting. Normally type certification for a pilot transitioning from like a 767 to a 777 would normally take 2 or 3 weeks in most environments. Most countries. In Japan, it took 6 months. because
Wow.
the pilots don't want to make a mistake. On
2 or
the
3
test.
weeks to 6 months is a big difference.
Yeah,
Wow.
because the pilots don't want to make a mistake
Yeah.
on the tests, so they study. They study very hard. So I fully understand, and I understand that culture is out there, and there is some of that here within our organization. But I do feel like in a lot of cases we have some risk-free conversations, and I think one of the things that I do that I think my predecessors have done as well is, it's not like we hammer somebody for the mistake. We take the mistake and figure out how to learn from it. And
So how does that conversation go? Say, for example, I'm your subordinate and I've screwed it up, basically, Maybe you thought I was going to zig and I decided to zag, or who knows what I did. Yeah. How would you bridge that conversation? I mean, what's a thing you've found is a good way to do that, and so deal with a mistake in a way that you think works well?
I think I might do it. One, I'd probably do it privately, not publicly.
Yep.
It's probably one of my military trainings that I've had a long time ago. Is it praise publicly, and we just talked about whether that's appropriate as often as you need to, but praise publicly and at least apprise somebody's behavior privately. But I'd probably pull them aside, not in front of a meeting or a large meeting, and have a conversation. It's probably a bit more constructive. I'd probably point out, if you're doing this, it could be construed as X, where, if our goal is this, and part of it is, having people aligned around what is the mission, what's the end goal. If our goal is this, does this actually lead us there, or does it take us on a parallel path or someplace different? And if it's a parallel path or someplace different, why is that better than maybe the direction that we're going? And really kind of get into both, why of what we're trying to do, but also allow that as an opportunity for them to, maybe say, hey, I've been thinking about it, and this is a different way. And then it might come into a conversation if they zigged instead of zagged. It would have been helpful to get up to speed before we got into the session, before this happened. But again, it's not yelling at them, not being angry or distrustful, but having the conversation.
Well, I've had numerous classes of Japanese team members. We often do public courses, so they come from different companies, and they talk about, when they were younger, they made mistakes. The Japanese boss would be scolding them publicly, yelling at them in front of everybody, really let it go, right? So it's a big improvement, I think, on that.
Yeah, when I was at the Naval Academy, and there was plenty of yelling when you got a recital wrong, and you'd have to do it in front of your squad and all that kind of stuff. So certainly got experience of that kind of front of things. So yeah.
And what about culture? You talked a little bit about culture there, and what have you found works well? Now, I mean, you've got your own personal concept of culture, which you bring with you wherever you work, I guess. And you've got then corporate cultures which exist, and usually it's a blend between things that you think work well in blending things that you like in a culture with the organizational direction around culture to come up with the culture of your leadership. What have you found works well in terms of building a culture as a leader?
I think probably a couple of things. I mean, one is, it probably starts with engagement, as you talked about before, of getting the employees that are working there at least a better understanding of what the big picture is, where are we headed, if there's a need, if we're actually changing, what is the need for change, and what kind of change is coming, and how we'll do it. I think in Japan and with the distributed workforce, to a certain extent. I mean, we certainly have high population centers, but we have quite a few people around the country. Sometimes it's hard to touch everybody with those kind of messages or things of where we're headed. I do think, I think the other half of it is developing your leadership team in your culture that that you want to operate in. And once you get a leadership team who's kind of operating to that culture, it actually helps because it's not just you who's trying to push or change everything. It certainly helps if there's an evangelist in the crowd who likes to talk about where we're headed or where we're going and is willing to talk to folks to really kind of emphasize things. We're right now in the heart of a cultural change within Boeing, kind of coming out of our very difficult years. And a lot of it are the things that will lead to more engagement. I mean, a lot of the things that we want our leaders to do now is really to engage the workforce and find those pockets of doubt and engage and have conversations with the employees and encourage them to speak, but also to also as a leader to listen and understand what the employee is not just turn it into your own frame, but understand what the employee's frame is and what is the issue that they're running into, and then also to speak out and not just as an employee but as a leader to speak out and make sure that you're carrying or encouraging some of the messages. And it's been a great tool set actually in how we're thinking about this cultural change. And to a certain extent, a lot of the activities that we do here in Japan are very separate from some of the things that caused our issues that we've had over the last couple of years. But that doesn't mean that the culture doesn't need to kind of move along with where the corporation is going and driving this, being able to encourage encouraging our employees to speak up, but also encouraging our leaders to really listen to what the employees have and seek out these pockets of uncomfortableness, of distrust, because they are there, and it really
How many
sometimes.
people work for Boeing in Japan?
We've got about 200.
200, right? So 200 people is a big group. You're bound to have some pockets of, some hesitation or something in a group that big, aren't you?
Yeah. So trying to find those and look for them. And they're not easy to find. I found a few, and we've kind of dealt with a few issues over the course of the last year and a half. But and they're not all, many of them are not around safety of flight. I mean, it's a lot of it is about, just how, certain leaders or other things kind of how they behave, or whether a process is not working, or whether there's, a concern around, how things are going in this part of the industry. So, yeah.
And what have you found, if you're going to give some advice, this is, how many years you've been in Japan in this job now?
Only just over 2.
2 years, right? So imagine, someone who's going to be, you had a bit of advantage because you'd been posted here before, so you knew a bit more about Japan, but someone who maybe they haven't spent a lot of time in Japan, they may have come on business trips, but you stay in a 5-star hotel, you're in meetings the whole time, and then you're back on the plane and you're home, so it's always very condensed, very, very, very short time frames, different to living here and working and leading a team. So if you're going to provide some advice to someone, say, okay, you're being sent to Japan, run our Japanese operation, they don't know Japan, they don't speak Japanese, what would be some advice you'd give them?
Yeah, I think probably one of the first things that I probably recognize is, just be humble. I mean, I think, the Japanese culture is generally not to stick out, right? So being a bit humble, which is maybe a little bit different than what a lot of ways that you succeed in some American or multinational corporations. Oftentimes you have to be the one who speaks up loudest or toots their own horn. Being a bit humble here, I think, is very leads to success, both with leading your team and also with working with your stakeholders. I think, I mentioned patience before. A lot of things are process-oriented here in Japan, and I'd love to see the innovation where things change faster, but also being patient and recognizing those small wins and being able to highlight those and know that, hey, this is actually moving, and sometimes it takes time to do it. And I'd recommend, being willing to explore and try something new. I mean, I can't tell you, I've had lots of conversations. I've been exploring a lot of the areas around Tokyo. I go hiking in the mountains. I go skiing. I bike down, in different places, really get out of Tokyo and go see the countryside. And when I go engage other folks that I work with, outside of the company, many of my stakeholders, and talk about these things, they get very excited and very encouraged that you're actually doing more than just coming to Tokyo and seeing what Tokyo is. You're actually getting out and seeing the rest of the country. And there's so much to see here, so much culture, and so much to explore. It's just amazing.
I've always found it a good practice to ask for onsen, hot spring advice. Do you have any good hot springs you've found which you'd recommend, or that you liked? I mean, that was always no one's opposed to a hot spring, time in Japan. That always people liked it. Oh, well, you go to Nagano, or you go here, you go there. Oh, great, I'll go there, Yeah. What else would you recommend to them?
Yeah, no. I think, part of it is, I'd actually have to say is when I say try something new, the whole onsen piece, particularly going to play a round of golf with your suppliers or something like that, and then doing the onsen afterwards is a little shocking culturally for you, at least for me as an American who's probably a little more, shy in that respect. But, it becomes a bit shocking, but it actually is a part of the Japanese culture and a little bit of an adjustment. I mean, I have a couple of really cool places I go visit, here nearby Tokyo within driving distance. I go down to the Izu Peninsula and I'll do, I'll bike, I'll hike, I'll do onsen, I'll spend a little bit of time on the beach. I mean, it's one of the best pieces I really enjoy, and it's not that bad to get to out of Tokyo, although I'd have to say it's probably easier for me now because there's less traffic during COVID.
No one's going anywhere,
during
right?
COVID.
It's the time to go.
Yeah, but I also am a big skier, and to get into the ski culture here is pretty amazing. It's a beautiful area to go skiing, and I've been blessed that I've had a couple of years with good good snow. I think 2 years ago in 2019 there wasn't a lot of snow, but or 2020 there wasn't a lot of snow, but
we're expecting some tomorrow, aren't we? And the day after
here in Tokyo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what other things would you recommend to them to think about if they're going to be running the operation in Japan?
No, I think obviously getting to know your people and getting to understand your people, and really knowing your team, I think is a big step forward of just trying to understand it.
And what works well in that regard? Because, I find in Japan you can get certain levels of understanding, but there's like a wall sometimes that maybe
there is.
Getting beyond that wall is not that easy. What have you found works to get beyond the wall?
Obviously, certainly, in non-COVID times, I think going out to have drinks after work or things like that certainly are a way to better know, and culturally it's an environment that works for the Japanese, right? It's part of kind of the Japanese company work culture, and very bluntly, it creates an environment where people can kind of let their hair down a little bit and maybe let you in behind the wall just a touch. But I think one, respecting that privacy, but two, just asking questions about being in a very polite and respectful way, asking questions about how was your weekend. Oftentimes, I find that early on I got the quick answer, and now I'm getting a lot more out of my employees. Just having those conversations and sharing what I did.
So, if you thought about your definition of leadership, what would that entail?
Yeah, I think when I think about leadership, I mean leadership is usually not about you. It's about it's about others. It's about inspiring them and being able to develop them into the team or the people that will help get your goals done. I mean, 90% of what happens from a company is really about individuals. It's really about getting them to do the right thing, to do what's necessary for the company, but also still provide that innovation or things like that you need to grow with. So I think leadership, a lot of it is around inspiring others. I think a lot of it is around as I said before, supporting your team and making sure that you stand behind them. I'm a big believer that giving your team that capability, not without support, but that capability to go lead or own their what they're doing is critical, because then they feel that ownership and that responsibility in doing that. So, yeah.
So, Will, there's something about leadership in Japan that I haven't asked you about. Anything we haven't covered you think is important?
I don't think so. I think we've
pretty much got it.
Covered
We've done it. We've covered good coverage.
Quite an array, yeah.
Then let me thank you very much for your time today, Will. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Greg.
And please join us again for the next episode of Japan's top business interviews.